American Airlines Flight 587, Nate Richardson, Dalen Marish. On the 12th of November 2001, American Airlines Flight 587 crashed into a residential area of Belle Harbor, New York. The Airbus A300-600 took off from Kennedy International and crashed shortly after. There were 260 people on board, including 7 flight attendants and 2 pilots, with 251 passengers on board. The flight was regularly scheduled for the Dominican Republic. So the cause of this crash was due to a loss of control and a in-flight separation of the vertical stabilizer. So what caused this separation? During flight, the aircraft hit wake turbulence from a Japan Airlines 747. This aircraft that they hit was obviously bigger than them, and it was on the same departure and took off from the same runway. So first, it hit the first initial wake turbulence from this aircraft, and then entered a 17-degree bank to the left. And following this, while they were still in that left turn, also in the departure turn, they hit a second wake encounter, which flight controls were abruptly made in an attempt to stabilize this aircraft. In doing so, the fittings of the stabilizer ended up failing, which caused the vertical stabilizer to be separated from the airplane at around 251 knots. So when this happened, the pilots obviously were unable to recover the aircraft, and they ended up crashing. So the problem and issue here, the FAA states that the key safety issue in this accident was just a lack of misunderstanding. So the pilots obviously were not trained well enough on their maneuvering speed and the knowledge of the integrity of their plane. Also, it says that there was a lack of knowledge in rudder control and maneuvering beyond the flight envelope. Many pilots are trained on normal operations and how to run checklists and how to, fix an emergency. But for this instance, they just didn't have enough knowledge in, what if something bad happens, how are we going to fix it, like in maneuverability wise. So the solution to this was they just made simulator training for the pilots to, get better at maneuvering beyond the flight envelope.
The single greatest human factor at play here would be confirmation bias. Specifically, when we take a look at the types of training that the first officer received, it was the Advanced Aircraft Maneuvering Program. It was an elective training program through American Airlines. The curriculum was built in response to a preceding aircraft incident relating to loss of control and in-flight upset. And the training that the first officer had received, some of it pertained to wake turbulence and how to react to wake turbulence. And the way that the course was structured was you were rewarded for using rudder authority in the experience or while experiencing a wake turbulence encounter. And in the simulator, pilots were rewarded for using rudder by returning to a correct flight attitude. Now, what this led to in this incident flight was excessive rudder input. Specifically with the A300-600, the incident aircraft flown for American Airlines Flight 587. For rudder control, we'll call it the floor for getting that rudder to move in the first place was relatively high. It took a decent amount of force to get the rudder to actually start moving in the first place. But the ceiling, I'll call it, the height of how far you're trying to get the rudder to go was significantly low in comparison there. So it really only took about an inch of travel for the pilot to get full deflection of the rudder at the speed that they were flying. And so with the rewarded behavior of using rudder to correct for a wake turbulence encounter, paired together with a very easy rudder to control, just really an overly sensitive rudder, is what kind of led to that back and forth play of getting the rudder to go in an oscillation type movement. And furthermore, a misunderstanding of the V-speed VA. There were a lot of American Airlines flight crew members who, when interviewed during the investigation, believed that VA would protect the aircraft in any type of maneuver. As long as you're below that VA speed, any maneuver would be protected. The plane would stall before it would fall apart. It was kind of the thinking as far as VA. However, VA, as we'll come to find, was reinforced to be full deflection of the elevator in one direction, not an oscillation, not a movement of yaw. But it's also important to point out that yaw is also a protected class of design characteristic. However, again, the classification there was for a deflection, not that oscillating movement, and definitely not repeatedly as much as it had happened. And we'll also take a look at applying some of the concepts from our own class, those being safety culture, hazard, risk mitigation, safety implementation, and crew resource management. Starting right at the top with safety culture, this is kind of a big one. You know, I'll touch on this a bit more in the conclusion, but I think it's important to note here that American Airlines seems to have had a pretty decent safety culture, well-intentioned in the sense that they're offering elective training to pilots to go beyond what's actually required of them. And the fact that the first officer here was willing to take that elective training to get a better sense of flying. The unfortunate downside is no matter how good the safety culture is, if the information taught is wrong, it can have devastating impacts as we now see. So, good safety culture, really well intentioned, but the execution, the way that it was handled and the way that it was taught turned out to not be helpful in this case. Next, touching on hazard, just the fact that the hazard of training pilots to use the rudder and it was later found, the NTSB recommended, that rewarding the behavior in an unnatural way, so having rudder input be the thing that solves the problem when that's not how the aircraft truly responds. The hazard there is giving incorrect training and giving people a wrong sense of how the aircraft will feel while flying. Risk mitigation, again, super well intentioned, but didn't pan out very well. And thankfully, American Airlines had gone back and revised this training after this incident. At the recommendation of the NTSB, FAA, and manufacturers, all signed off and said, this is good, this is fine. But they ended up going back and reapplying that training in a way that didn't result in excessive rudder use. Safety implementation, and this one's a little bit to a lesser degree than some of the others before, but safety implementation, getting that information out there, having it available to pilots, and then unfortunately after this accident, updating it and having it be more relevant information, more up-to-date information. And then lastly, crew resource management was an interesting one here. The communication that we know because of the cockpit voice recorder, there's communication, they recognize that there was a wake turbulence event, but the captain never called the first officer out on the rudder movement, not really knowing. We don't really know if the captain had a grasp or an idea on the situation, or maybe the captain even had that same training too, but never mentioned anything about it prior to it happening. But there was communication there. The captain was handling radios and the first officer flying at the time of the accident. So changes that have taken place since the accident. Immediately after the accident, American Airlines came out and made updates to that AAMP, the Advanced Aircraft Maneuvering Program. They updated the curriculum there to, again, I touched on this earlier, but give pilots a better sense of how the aircraft will react and how it will feel, and a better procedure for recovering from wake turbulence. The FAA then went on to, at the request of the NTSB, clarify the V-Speed VA, and that resulted in changes to the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, advisory circular, so on and so forth, just clarifying the definition of VA and making sure that there is that understanding, because there was previously the misunderstanding of what VA was. Again, just ensuring that VA is protecting the aircraft in the event of a full elevator deflection, not any other axis of movement, and certainly not oscillations. And then lastly, the most recent one, 3 years ago now, and more than 20 years since, but having probably the greatest impact would be the FAA's final rule on this came out in November of 2022. Just comes down to design standards. So obviously this won't impact aircraft of a certain vintage, but going forward, like I said, having the biggest impact, going forward, new aircraft designs, just updating the standards requirements for control axis and control surfaces and their abilities to withstand forces. But digging a little bit deeper, we might start to think about our training and what we know to be true. What we know to be true is the best information that we have available at the time. However, that's always subject to change, and it is always changing because we learn more every day, and we should continue even at an individual level, not on the macro scale, but on an individual level, do our best to learn more each day. Keeps us proficient, keeps us current, keeps us up to date with things, and keeps us flying safer. Thank you.